For this session, I want to review over the basic HTML skeleton and add a few things to it. We're getting to the point now where we can start to realize that there's more to the HTML skeleton than the HTML head, title, and body tags. I'm going to go ahead and start with the very top line and add something new, something called a doc type. And this generally goes before your opening HTML tag, line number 1. And this defines the version of HTML that you want the browsers to use. Now in the past, this line of text has been very long. You can go out and Google the term doc type, D-O-C-T-Y-P-E, anytime you want, and you can see just how incredibly long and cumbersome these things were. With HTML5, which is the newest and most current version, they took all that away. All you have to put is HTML. So the thinking is this will be the last version of HTML. We finally got it right, so we don't have to put a version number here, which is kind of bizarre, but at the same time this is the line of code that tells our browsers we're using this version of HTML and we want you to interpret it that way. It'll clear up some of the things, specifically probably in Internet Explorer, where you might not be able to get a container to center itself or whatnot. So generally this is going to be first. We'll follow that up with the HTML, the head tag, of course, the title tag. I'm going to call this new HTML skeleton. I'm going to go ahead and drop in also the link tag that goes to my CSS. We've been over this a time or two. And this is simply linking to my style sheet, which I'm going to call style.css. I haven't created that file yet, but I will. And this will close the head at this point. I don't get too far. I'm in Text Wrangler on a Mac. I'm going to go ahead and go up to there's one of these where you can tell it which type of code to be so that it knows how to color code things. But maybe I'll just go ahead and do a file save as. And I'm going to save this up to my desktop. I'm going to create a root folder for myself called demo, for lack of a better term here. And I'll save this as index.html. And once we get the .html on it, then it starts to color code everything so it looks a little bit better. Next we're used to the body tag, which that doesn't change. It's going to be there no matter what. But inside the body tag, generally we're going to have a few other things, and that's where I'd kind of like to start with today. 9 times out of 10, you're going to have a div tag with either a class or an ID of something called container or wrapper. Now the container or wrapper is going to go just about the distance of this entire body. And everything that I've got is going to go in that. Now I'll go back into the CSS momentarily, but for this session I want to go ahead and drop in some div tags. So if I stopped right at this point, I could say this is technically the new HTML skeleton. We're going to add a few more things to it, but just like over the past few sessions, we start by doing the basic skeleton. I'm adding this to it. And adding the container to it, and maybe even a few other things. Now let's say inside the container we would like to go ahead and maybe drop in some other things. One of the tools that I really like right now is something called Wireframe.cc. I did Wireframe.css. Wireframe.cc. Now this is a website that basically allows you to just sort of click and drag to make wireframes. A wireframe is really just a rough sketch of where you want things to go on your website. So I could say something like that's going to be my header. Oops. I'm going to highlight that, and then after it highlights, then you can give it an outline or a rounded corner or whatever you want to do there. So I'm going to give it a box. Maybe I want my header, my navigation bar to be right below that. And then below that, let's say that I want 3 columns. I could do 1, 2, and 3. Now obviously this doesn't do a lot for me design-wise besides just sort of mapping out where things are going to go, wireframing out where things are going to go. So, you know, I can see here that there's going to be a header, a nav, and maybe 3 columns. I know from experience, anytime I have a rectangular section like this, this is going to be a div. So all of this is going to be in a container div if I want it centered in the middle of my screen. So I can really look at this and say, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 divs. So it's just a nice little thing you can do. You can also save these, which saves it a URL that you can keep later, and you could do some more stuff with this. But Wireframe.cc is a pretty quick and easy way without having to fire up Photoshop or Illustrator to give yourself a pretty generic layout. So with 5 other divs inside of this, I'm going to go ahead and create those without even doing the CSS. I'm going to do div class equals header, and I'm just going to put some text in there that says header info goes here. I'll close that div. Next, I'm going to make a div with a class called nav. I'll say buttons go here. And all this is just placeholder text for right now. Div class equals col1. I'll make this column 1. And I'll repeat that process for columns 2 and 3. So I'll just simply do a copy and paste and paste. And I'll change this to column 2, column 2, column 3, and column 3. So I've got a container div that starts right here, stops down here, and inside of that I have 5 other divs. Now if I were to go ahead and save this as it is and take a look at this in my favorite web browser, it's not going to look like much. I can see everything that I've got there. Nothing is centered, nothing kind of lines up, but that's okay. That's just because without CSS, all of these go the width of the page. So they are all on separate lines. I haven't done any line breaks or anything, so at least I know something is working. I'm going to go out and go ahead and create my CSS now. So I'm going to go to File, New, Tab, in Text Wrangler, File, New, Text Document. I'll go ahead and do a Save As right here at the beginning. I'm just going to save it as style.css, making sure it goes into that demo folder. And I'll move this over. I don't really need to see the difference between index and style. I have my names memorized there of each one of those divs. For your benefit, I'll increase my font size so you can actually see what I'm typing a little better. And I'm going to go right in order. I have 6 div tags, 1 container, and 5 more inside of it. So I'm going to start with .container. And we know from a previous lesson that a container typically has 4 things. I'm going to give this a width of 955 pixels. I'm going to give this a background color, and I'll do 369. That's just kind of a standard blue that I've used before. It's going to have a margin of auto, which is the magic property and value that centers this in the middle of the screen. And I'm going to also give it an overflow of hidden. And for right now, all you have to know about that is that that helps our background colors or background images, like this color I've got here, to show up in all browsers and all situations. Even if I don't want this blue background on there, typically I still give it 1 here at the beginning just so I can kind of see what's happening, just so I can see what's going on. Now if you want to save that and go back to your browser and refresh what you've got, at the very least you should see a container. It's blue. It doesn't have the full width of the screen. It's only 955. No matter how wide I make my monitor, it stays centered. So it looks like container so far is working. Let's go back to our code, and I'm going to add one called header. Header, I'm going to go ahead and give this a width of 955 px. It's going to go the full width of my container. I'm going to also give it a height. Now, I'm not a big fan of putting heights on divs. The couple of exceptions are the header and nav div that you typically have on the top of your design. Reason being, you typically do not have to expand that based on your content. That header is going to be the same height no matter what. So I'm going to put 100 pixels on here just to kind of eyeball it. If you want to do anything with your fonts, for example, if I want to do font size, I could do that. Maybe make it a little bigger, 18 point. You could do a background on here if you want. I think I'm not going to this time. I'm just going to do a width, height, and font size. My nav is going to be very, very similar. I'm going to line break down a few times here to move this up. My nav is going to be very similar. Same 2 or 3 properties. I'll give it a width, also of 955 px, a height. Let's make it around 40 px or so. We can always come back and change these. And I don't think I'm going to give this one a font size. I'll just keep it as is there. But I will give it a background color. And we'll make this 963. We'll see what that gives us. So good time to save that. I'll go refresh my browser. Looks like it's working. My header itself has a height. I can see that everything gets pushed down, so that is my header. I didn't give it a background color, but I can also see that my text is larger. Can also see my navigation, my nav div here. 963 apparently is kind of this brownish orange color, and that's about all I did there besides a width and a height. So now we're ready to lock in those next 3 columns, and they're also going to be very similar to one another. Call 1, I'm going to give it a width, and this time I have to be a little bit strategic about how I put these together. The width of all 3 of these has to add up to be 955 px. So I'm going to make this first one 255 px. Make it easy on myself. Make these all add up to 900 even. I'm not going to put a height because as my content expands, I also want it to expand. So I'm not going to put a height on it at all. I am going to need a float on it of left. And if you want to do a background color, you are welcome to. This time I'll try 693. Take those same 3 numbers and put them in different orders. Those are going to be the 3 properties that I'll need on all 3 of these columns. So this time, instead of typing it from scratch, I'm simply going to copy it, paste it a couple of times, and I'll simply change these numbers around. Column 2, for example, I'm going to make kind of wide. I'm going to give it a width of 400. The float is also going to be left, and the background color, I'm just going to take it off. I don't want a background on that middle column. If I add these up, 400 and 255, that adds it to be 655. That means I've got 300 pixels left. If you add 300, 400, and 255, that adds up to be 955. This is my 3rd column, so it'll be column 3. The float on this one, according to my wireframe here, is going to be my rightmost, so I'm going to give that a float of right. And we'll give it a background color of DDD. Going to save that, check this out in my browser. And it looks like that's working. This first one I gave a random number, it's going to put a green in there. Second one doesn't have a color. The 3rd one I gave DDD, which is a light gray. And they're stacking side by side, which is ultimately what I want. Now if I run out to libsym.com and grab a few paragraphs to drop in there, it's going to make my layout look a little bit more complete, but it's going to make my code look a bit uglier. And the reason is right now in my HTML, it's all nice and laid out. And it's very short. I've only got 16 lines of code for everything you see there. When I start to paste in paragraphs in here, or when I start to drop in graphics for buttons or some sort of anchor tags, this is all going to get lengthy and a little bit harder on the eyes. So what I'm going to do here is simply move that closing tag down, delete what I had in there, and paste in a few of these paragraphs. Now it looks like I didn't have my my word wrap on, so which is okay. Maybe it's a little easier to see that way. I'm going to put a paragraph tag around each one of these. Opening P at the beginning. That's a lot of scrolling. I'm going to put a closing P out here at the end. I'll just copy that closing paragraph tag and drop it there and drop it there. And all three of these paragraphs are in my column 1. Now, if you turn your word wrap on, which I can do under View, Text, and Soft Text Wrap, the paragraphs are in there and they look more like paragraphs. The only issue I have with this is, now my code gets kind of lengthy. When I look at my column 1, I see that it starts here and it's not real obvious where it ends. It ends out here. So just with doing that, I should be able to go back here and look at my demo, and sure enough, I've got a column here that goes all the way down. I could continue that and copy and paste that in my other 2. I'm actually going to copy and paste just the same 3. Paste that in there and paste that in column 3. And notice I didn't hit enter or anything to break these down onto different lines. A lot of times when you look at other people's code, you're going to see closing paragraphs and closing divs all together, and that's what kind of makes this hard on the eyes, I think. When you're learning code, and it's hard to look at these brackets and not see like a funny shaped eyes there. It has nothing to do with that. It's simply just 2 tags placed together. So whether you put it all together or you separate it out is completely up to you. They both work the same way, but when I refresh it now, I've got paragraphs in each one. Now they don't all have the same height, which is another problem for another day. But for right now, at least that gives us a skeleton to start putting our website together in. And it's a fairly quick process if you get the code right. So with the last session, I think we spent quite a bit of time going back and forth between creating an HTML div tag, then go into CSS, and then create an HTML div tag and go into CSS. This time I kind of did them all, all the HTML at one time and then all the CSS at another time. Of course, this isn't over. You can completely go back to your CSS at any time. You can add things like font properties or different background colors. You can take things off if you want. There's just a lot of options you can do with CSS, but this is just a basic layout. One last thing for this session, I wanted to show you what overflow of hidden does. If you do not have overflow of hidden there, I'm just going to cut that out. I want to show you what happens to your container background color. When I look at this, as is, before I refresh it, the container background is blue, and I can see that blue show through in a few areas. When I refresh that, the container background color disappears underneath my nav. It's very strange, but in theory what happens is a div's background color shows up as long as there's content in it. And when I say content, I mean text or images. And even though you can look at this and say, well, Alan, there's absolutely text in here, that's true, but this text is also in another div. So when the browsers look at these HTML documents, if there's nothing inside of a div but other divs, it only shows the background to that point. So in this case, we see the background color show through up here in the header because there's text in here. And it shows up down to the next thing, which is a div. So when I put this nav div in, essentially that background color is going to show up from here to here, and from that point on it disappears. Now how do we get overflow hidden out of that? That seems backwards. It seems like right now the background is hidden, but that's not true. The overflow of an HTML document is whatever's out here. Whatever's out and to the right and left of your container. Outside of your container is called the overflow. So if there's nothing in a div but other divs, it shows the overflow. It allows this white background or whatever you have out there to show through. We don't want this white to show through. We would like the the background color to the container, which is blue, to show through. So we need to hide the overflow. We need to hide the white. It's a really backwards way to say it, but that's exactly what we do. We put an overflow of hidden, and that hides the overflow. It hides all of this white excess space. So when I refresh it, it's hidden. As long as I'm within this container div, this white will be hidden. So very strange thing. If none of that makes sense, I'm sorry, but it's okay. As long as you remember, on a container, the thing that goes around all of your content, you need those 4 properties. You need a width, you need a background most of the time. Even if you don't keep it forever, you can put it in there at first so you can see what the heck's going on. You need a margin of auto because that's what centers this, and you need an overflow of hidden so that your background shows through all the time. So that concludes this session. Hope it makes sense to you. Don't hesitate to email me with questions if you need me. Thanks.